Hey guys, it's Andrew Henderson from nomadcapitalists.com. I'm here in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, where today I did something for the very first time in my life. And that is I went to a Thai embassy and applied for a tourist visa. Now I'm going to do a separate video on that soon after I've received and used the tourist visa and explain how that process works and why it's relevant to what we do at Nomad Capitalist. But I wanted to explain something that I thought of today when I was standing at the Thai embassy that a lot of people aren't really aware of, and that I think people should be aware of when it comes to the world of second passports, when it comes to the world of changing your nationality, particularly for US citizens who may not want to be US citizens anymore. And that is what I would call the soft benefits of a Tier A passport. Now, this video is going to discuss some things that are stereotypes. They're not my stereotypes, they are the stereotypes of bureaucrats around the world, so if that offends you, this is not the video that you want to watch. I'm just going to share what I've observed and what many others I know have observed, whether it's right or wrong. So I'm not endorsing the behavior, I'm merely going to talk about it. So what do I mean by soft benefits of a Tier A passport? Well, you know that I separate passports into 3 different tiers. We've got a video on that. Tier A passport is more or less one that you can get into the United States and pretty much any country in the world. That means that you're either US, Canadian, Australian, Western European citizen. And if you have one of these passports, obviously, you can just go to Thailand without a tourist visa. You don't have to go wait at the embassy. But what they also don't tend to do in most parts of the world is ask you many questions. With the exception of the US, the UK, occasionally Canada, occasionally any of the English-speaking countries, Ireland. But with the exception of those countries, if you've got a Tier A passport, nobody really asks any questions. You show up, what many people, like Americans for example, don't know is that if you show up in Thailand or pretty much any other country, you're supposed to have X amount of dollars that you can prove to the immigration officer that you can support yourself. You're supposed to carry $500 or $1,000 or $2,000 in cash. Some countries allow you to show a credit card. Some countries, want you to show proof of onward travel. Most do, in fact. However, if you've got a Tier A passport and you're a US or Canadian or German or whatever citizen and you show up here in Malaysia or in Thailand or wherever else, chances are they're not going to ask you any questions. They're going to look at your passport, they're going to make sure it's you, they're going to stamp it, and you're going to move on. Same applies to places, Serbia, for example. A lot of countries want Tier A passport holders to come here, and they really don't enforce the requirements to demonstrate that you have sufficient funds, demonstrate you're leaving the country before the tourist visa expires, etc. They don't ask you any questions. What happens when you go and apply for a tourist visa using a Tier B or a Tier C passport? If you got a Tier C passport, they're going to ask you a lot of questions. They're going to ask you for special documentation in many cases. If you've got a Tier B passport, the kind that someone might get as a second passport, which includes any of the economic citizenships, they may ask you some questions. So when I went to the embassy today, she said, okay, well, I see you're entering Bangkok from Singapore. I said, yeah. She said, when are you going to Singapore? I told her. She said, okay, so you're in Singapore for 1 day, and then you're coming to Bangkok for 1 day, and then you're coming back. I said, yeah. And she's like, why? I said, well, I'm going to Singapore, I'm meeting somebody, I'm going to a bank, and then meeting a friend who's in Bangkok for the weekend, and I'm leaving Sunday night. Okay. You would never be asked those questions if you just showed up. Why are you here for 1 day? What are you doing? I guess I got asked jokingly a couple times in like Belgium. Why are you here why are you leaving so soon? Ha ha ha. But nobody really asks any questions. So that's something to be aware of. I think that a lot of people don't prepare themselves for that if they're going to get a second passport and start traveling on it, that occasionally they're going to be asked some questions they may not have heard before. The same thing applies to bank accounts overseas. You may get asked questions when you open a foreign bank account that you would never been asked with a bank in your home country. This is something that most people aren't prepared for. It's why I think more people probably need hand-holding when they actually get started doing this nomad capitalist lifestyle, because you're going to be asked questions that you don't have experience with. And again, in the case of the Thai embassy, not a big deal. You explain it. I don't think they particularly are too worried. But that brings up the second point that I think has to be acknowledged, and this is a bit more sensitive. You know, you hear this term thrown around in the United States, and at times people use it pretty aggressively. But let's not lie to ourselves that, you know, there's not a white privilege that exists in other parts of the world. And what I mean by that is, when I use a Comoros passport to go to Hong Kong or to go to Singapore, I still look like me. I'm still a tall, you know, relatively blonde-haired, blue-eyed white guy. I've been in the lines with people who have better passports, but they look Indian, or, you know, they have Chinese heritage, or they're Muslim in some countries. And they get a lot more scrutiny than I do. And when you look at enough examples of this, you realize that, you know, this is something to take into account. I hate to say it. If you were a U.S. citizen, for example, and you want to give up your U.S. citizenship, but you were actually born somewhere else in a country that people don't hold in as high of regard, people may ask you questions about that later in a way that they wouldn't ask someone who's a natural-born U.S. citizen. So those are two issues that I think are worth keeping in mind. For banking, which could be a separate topic, but for visas, for showing up, for tourist visas, for all of that, definitely if you're going to get a second passport, unless you get one through Ancestry or unless you get one through paying Malta almost $1 million, you're going to get a Tier B passport or Tier C. And you're going to get a couple questions. Nothing you can't deal with, but you need to know what to be prepared for when you go to get visas, when you go to countries visa-free or visa on arrival. And it's definitely, I think, important, kind of like when you go to a 5-star hotel, if you look like you own the place, you just walk around wherever you want to go. Whereas if you showed up looking like a homeless guy, they'd kick you out. The same thing kind of applies here. I mean, if you look professional, if you look well put together, I think you will have no problems. And that's not to say that there weren't plenty of people at the Thai embassy today who were wearing flip-flops and, you know, beer t-shirts, who probably are also going to get their visas. But I'm telling you, when you do get into this full nomad capitalist lifestyle, it pays to at least think about this stuff and at least be prepared, because you're probably receiving a lot of soft benefits from your Tier A passport and also from your appearance in many cases that you may not get if you shift things up a little bit. More than worth it, I believe, to answer a couple questions here and there to get the tax, the lifestyle, all the other benefits.